a kind of futuristic glitch-like effect here on the right. And we're going to be using CSS and HTML. We're not going to be using JavaScript at all. For convenience, we will be using SCSS, but using Visual Studio Code, VS Code, it will compile down to CSS as we edit. So when we bundle it together, we won't need any sort of node transpiler or anything like that. So the extensions that I'm going to be using today are live Sass Compiler, and once you've created an SCSS file, you can just press this button down here which says Watch Sass, and then it will live reload the Sass for you into CSS. And then we are also going to be using Live Server, which just allows you to see your changes immediately as they happen, rather than having to reload your browser every time you make a change. And in order to start the Live Server, you right click on the HTML and then open with Live Server. Excellent. So to start with, I'm just going to save this empty Sass file. So now it's back to normal. Inside your index.html, I just typed in doc and it created that HTML for me. I've named the title glitch, which you can see up here, imported the CSS file with a link, and then inside the body we've got a div with the class of it container and then an h1. And that's all you need for HTML, so you can close that off now. First off, inside your index.scss, you'll want to import the font that you want to use. I'm going to be using Archivo Black. And then we are going to just reset the spacing around elements. So we want box sizing, border box, and then no margin and no padding, just for kind of convenience sake. And you can see that immediately the H1 has shifted up. So the live reloading and the SCSS to CSS is all working fine. Okay, next off we want to add some styles to the body. We are going to change the default font family to Archivo Black. We want to change the background to a black color. We want the text color to be white. We don't need this min height actually, because we're working with the body, which is by default the height of your viewport. We are going to display flex and align items and justify content center, just to shove everything in the middle of the page, and it should look like that. Next up, we want to add some styles to the container, which is the div immediately inside the body that contains this hello world text. First off, we want to transform the text to uppercase, change the spacing of the letters so they're a bit more spaced out and not squished together, put a border around it. Because we're going to be using before and after pseudo-elements, we want position relative on the parent of that, because we're going to be absolutely positioning the stuff inside the container. We're going to put a width on it, just so the border doesn't look like it's right on the text, align everything in the middle, and then add a bit of padding to the border. And it should look like that once you're done. Next up, inside this container, we're going to create an H1. And if you haven't seen SCSS before, this is not valid CSS. However, when we add a style to this, it will compile down into CSS with this live Sass reloader thing. So the first styles we're going to add to our H1 are, we're going to change the font size, make sure it's sans serif. Again, create the font weight and then relative position them, the H1. And that will look like that. And if you have a look inside your index.css, you'll see that we've got our container styles. And the way that SCSS works is anything inside. So you've got this H1 inside the container. That's the equivalent of writing container and then H1 afterwards. So it's a really convenient way of structuring your styling that will be compiled down to normal CSS without stuff getting lost, basically. That's the way I use it, at least. Right, next up, we want to initialize our before and after pseudo-elements. So the way that you create a pseudo element in SCSS is you want this ampersand, colon colon before, and then same for after. And then firstly, we're just going to put content of hello world so you can see it on the page. And then that will look like that. And how that works, if you haven't seen Sass before, is as opposed to just putting colon colon before and colon colon after, the ampersand squashes it on the end of whatever you're inside. So this is the before element of the H1 rather than that, which is what you'd have if you didn't have the ampersand. Cool. And next, we want to add some extra styling to the pseudo elements. So if we put that in there, we want to absolute position them. We want the background to be black so you can't see the text, the underlying text through them. We want the overflow to be hidden, throw them at the top, and because we're going to be left positioning each one individually later, but we do need the top to be 0. And then because one of them is going to be shoved over to one side and one's going to be shoved over to the other, we want the width of them to be 100% minus however much you're going to be shoving them over. So in our case, it's going to be 5 pixels. Save that. That's absolutely fine. We haven't defined our left variable yet. We've only defined the top. So that'll fix itself in a minute. So next we want to just target the before. This one we're going to have left of 5 pixels and text shadow of red. Nice red text shadow there. And then we want to define an animation. So the name is going to be glitch animation 1. And you can call it whatever you want. We're going to define 2 separate animations so that it looks like the 2 pseudo elements are acting independent of each other, which I guess they actually will be. The duration is going to be 7 seconds in our case. You can experiment with how long you want your animation to be. Our timing function will be linear. The delay of 0 seconds. The iteration count infinite. Direction alternate reverse. And then we can ignore the fill mode. Cool. And now we can do exactly the same thing for after. So if we copy that down, change this to after, this is going to be left of minus 5 pixels. We want the text shadow to be blue and glitch animation 2. And everything else can stay the same, although on the after pseudo element we're also going to add a margin left of 5 pixels. Cool. And there we go, you can very faintly see the blue line, but now all the text is on top of itself and the background is black. If we didn't have that, it'll look a little bit shifty, and that's because you can see the text underneath, but we want this background to be black so you can't see through it. Finally, we need to actually define the animations that we've referenced here. So first we want at keyframes glitch animation 1. And I'll show how this changes from SCSS to CSS once we've written it. So first off, we want to define a variable. Steps is going to be 20, and that's because we're going to use percentages to in this in order to show a random section of the hello world in whatever color you're doing. And setting steps to 20 means that the increment's going to be every 5%. Next, we want to create a for loop to actually generate these every 5% things. So at for variable I from 0 through $steps, which you've just defined. I'll write this next bit out and then explain it. So we want percentage, lowercase p, of $I times by 1 over $steps. So that's saying basically every 5%, 1 divided by 20 in our case. 1 times, it's hard to describe. Anyway, yeah, every 5% this is going to happen. I'm just going to copy this next bit just because it's a little bit verbose, but I'll go through it in a second. So if we paste that in and close this, we've defined a number of variables. Num1, which is 1 over 100 times 100%, so that's going to be a random number between 1 and 100%. Same again for num2, and then we're going to define the left of the element and the right of the element to be 0 and 100%, and then we're going to be using clip path of polygon, which defines the top left corner, top right corner, bottom right corner, and bottom left corner. So obviously left and right are 0 and 100%, and then how high it is starting is num1, and how low it's ending is num2. So that will create a kind of rectangular slice on your page. And then you can just copy that down to glitch animation 2, press save, and there you go, you've got your glitch animation. And that's basically it. Now you can go about your day. But just to go over what the SCSS has created in here. And the great thing of using this live compiler is that it puts all this WebKit prefix stuff and the MS prefix stuff on for you, which is important if you want your site to be compatible with Firefox or Safari-based browsers like iOS browsers and the actual Safari browser. So what that for loop did was for every 5%, it's inserted the variables into this clip path and the WebKit clip path. So you remember left is 0%, right is 100%, and then the top in this case is going 25, 85, 37, 31, and then bottom is 46, 47, 8, 4, and so on. And every time you refresh this SCSS file, that'll be regenerated. But the point being that it should look fairly random, and especially if you change the steps on one of the animations, it will sync up much less than if you have them at the same steps. Cool. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Thank you.